Take a trip with me in 1913 to Calumet, Michigan in the copper country.
100 years ago, a labor strike was launched in the copper country of Michigan. That strike divided a community and helped change the nation. This is the story of Red Metal, the copper country strike of 1913. This program is made possible in part by contributions to our PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
They say that geology is destiny in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. Since the mid-1800s, legions of men have descended through darkness, tunneled through bedrock, in search of metal hidden in the earth. That search has defined every aspect of life here. Mining has meant discovery and innovation, risk and reward, life and death. The effort continues today at the Kennecott Eagle Mine in Marquette County. Since late 2011, miners have worked around the clock to reach an ore body containing copper, nickel, cobalt, and gold. Demand for these metals is growing, and several mining companies are exploring the Upper Peninsula for untapped deposits. They're also reevaluating mines that were abandoned decades ago when they were worked with now obsolete extraction methods. A 100 miles away in the Upper Peninsula's northwest corner, there's an abundance of these abandoned mines and abandoned mining equipment. The region is called the Copper Country, in tribute to the element found in its bedrock. The landscape is strewn with relics from America's industrial age. To many, they're reminders of the heyday of Michigan mining. To others, they're reminders of a labor strike that took place during that heyday, exactly 100 years ago. The Copper Country Strike of 1913 transformed a diverse workforce into a labor union. At the same time, the strike divided the community and ended in tragedy.
Take a trip with me in 1913 to Calumet, Michigan in the copper country.
Right about when the strike of 1913-14 happens here, if you want to talk about how safe are these mines, this is the deadliest era ever up here in terms of the loss of life per year.
Two of the older sisters were pulled away in the rush and thrown down the stairs. My one aunt was left for dead.
This is something that really struck at the chords across America. The companies had just hardened in their position and would not be moved.
A grand jury investigated all the strike crimes. Even though there were hundreds of witnesses, they chose not to prosecute anybody.
While the tragedy's cause was never determined, this much is certain. The 1913 strike changed the copper country and the country as a whole for all time. Of the countless words that describe Michigan's Upper Peninsula, the most fitting is timeless. Much of the region is just as it was 10,000 years ago, when the Ice Age ended and the Great Lakes took on their present shape. The wilderness was marked by an abundance of copper. The Native Americans who settled here found masses of the red metal in the riverbeds, in the forests, in the pits they dug. In 1840, a Michigan geological team surveyed the region, probed the earth, and declared the copper ores here of superior quality compared to any found elsewhere. That triggered the copper rush.
Geology was what got a whole lot of the early settlers up to the Upper Peninsula. Geology was what produced wealth, and yet at the same time, geology was kind of hit and miss.
Professor Larry Langton is a historian specializing in 19th century American industrialization and the social history of mining communities.
Typically, when the mining company came up here and started to open up the ground, they would use basically unskilled laborers with shovels and pickaxes and things like that in order to uncover some copper. If the mining company found what they thought was a promising amount of copper, then they actually start sinking some shafts, going 100 feet, 200 feet underground. You've got a bunch of single men living in a crude boarding house. There are no women around, no children around. But then if they go 200 feet down and they find that this copper does look like it can pay, that we can actually make money on it, then they go into the production stage.
Demand for copper increased exponentially as America electrified and industrialized. Mining operations expanded to meet this demand, and Michigan became the country's largest copper producer. Production on this unprecedented scale required men skilled in drilling, blasting, and hauling rock, willing to work 10-hour days, 6-day weeks in darkness for subsistence wages. That meant immigrants.
If you take a look at who was coming into the copper country in the 1840s, 50s, 60s, 70s, they're the same people who came to the rest of the United States. You're looking at people from Great Britain. You had a number of Germans. You had a number of Irish. They were skilled miners. They knew it. They took pride in the fact that it was a hard occupation done in dangerous conditions. And these people kind of accepted the hazards that they found underground. Then when you get around 1900, the ethnic mix changes a lot. And you start getting Eastern Europeans, you start getting Southern Europeans. What did set us apart is we got a large number of Finns who migrated here who weren't necessarily migrating to other parts of the United States in anywhere near the same numbers that came here.
The latest immigrants, when the Finns came and when the Eastern Europeans came, they were generally sent to be trammers in the beginning, which was the hardest job and the worst paying.
Historian James Curtie has spent his career documenting the experience of Finnish immigrants in the copper country. They arrived at a time when the mines assigned jobs according to ethnicity and race.
I remember the old-timers like my grandfather talking about being waist-deep in water. You know, if your light went out, you had to find your way in the mine, hoping you didn't fall down some pit and hoping something didn't fall on you. And how they would watch someone die or someone be injured and suffer and have to wait till the man car came. Sometimes they waited till the shift was over before they would take the injured out.
The new immigrants went automatically into the unskilled workforce. They're coming from agrarian tradition, and they came across the ocean and suddenly got on a man car and went down into a mine here. And frankly, it scared the hell out of a lot of them, and rightly so. One of the most important characteristics of mining underground here was just how dark that it was. If you take a look at photographs of the underground mining, and many were taken in the 19th century, the photographs always show the mine as brighter than it actually was because the photographer is using, flash powder and things to illuminate the scene. So it looks like daylight down there. But what it really is like 2 candles. And you got a team of 3 men working with the light of 2 candles. You're basically working in one little pool of light surrounded by darkness.
Metal mining was the most dangerous occupation in America, and copper mining was the most dangerous type of metal mining. Thousands of men were killed and maimed every year in the copper country's mines. There was no shortage of dangers.
Your chances of getting killed in a Michigan copper mine are 1 out of 200, basically, for decade after decade. 1 out of 200 men employed underground will die, will not be there at the end of the year. So that means, basically, the more people you hire, the more people are going to die.
It was a risk many were willing to take. Skilled workers who flocked to the copper country's mines were paid roughly $3 a day. Unskilled workers earned less than $2. They helped place Michigan's copper mines among the nation's most profitable enterprises. Many ended up working for a colossus called the Calumet and Hecla Mining Company. For a time, it was the world's leading copper producer. Its operations sprawled over hundreds of acres above ground and reached 7,000 feet below. Like most mining companies, Calumet and Hecla provided its workers with housing and amenities that made the danger and low wages more bearable. The company encouraged American pastimes, while its schools prepared future generations for work underground. In the town of Calumet, many of the mining company's structures are still standing.
There are people here today occupying homes built by Calumet and Hecla for the miners 100 years ago. Benevolent paternalism is often used to describe the relationship between the mines and the workers, because the Calumet and Hecla mine owned everything in town. They owned the hospital, they owned the library, they owned the workers' homes, and they owned the land upon which almost everything sat.
Steve Lehto's family came from Finland and settled in the Calumet area, where his maternal great-grandfather found work in the mines. As an attorney and historian, Lehto has applied his investigative skills to examining the world his ancestors inhabited.
So people say, the mines provided everything for you. Isn't that good? It's not good. Because, for instance, while you were living in a company home, they could kick you out for any reason on 15 days' notice. If you lost your job, they could kick you out immediately. If you got killed in the mine, they could come kick your widow out immediately. So this kind of control they exerted over you touched every aspect of your life.
At the turn of the 20th century, industry and science began examining human labor in motion and time studies meant to increase productivity. In the copper country, new work concepts and technologies began altering traditional workplace relationships, according to historian Allison Hoagland.
The idea of modern management was, of course, very much in step with the scientific management that was sweeping the industrial world at this time. How to make all these workers' actions more efficient. So instead, when formerly foremen had been in charge of who did work, now managers in the central office wanted to control every step of a worker's action.
In the copper country, the leading advocate of scientific management was James McNaughton. He'd labored in the mines as a boy and worked his way up to the position of general manager of Calumet and Hecla.
James McNaughton had come on the scene as a very business-like, modern kind of manager that was going to put Calumet and Hecla on very solid ground. McNaughton had very little sympathy with any complaints from workers. He didn't have long-standing family relationships with them like some of the previous general managers had. He was very businesslike and very harsh.
McNaughton was battling inefficiencies in production, as well as competition from open-pit mines out west.
The mining companies here, they're operating the deepest mines in the United States. They're mining the lowest grade copper deposits in the United States. They've got the smallest profit margin of the copper mining industries in the United States. And they think they absolutely have to have productivity increases if they're going to survive.
In 1906, a new mining technology was patented and marketed as a breakthrough. the Lehner water drill could bore through rock as fast as a traditional piston drill, but it weighed 150 pounds and could be operated by just one man.
Since 1880, they'd been using machine drills here that 2 men operated. What the mining companies wanted was to find a smaller drill that 1 man could operate at a time. That means it would sort of basically double the productivity of each miner underground because he doesn't have to have that partner. Well, the men can do arithmetic as well. If they let in a machine that only needs 1 man to operate, what happens? The other man, he loses his job. The one-man drill was a threat to miners here in a variety of ways. In terms of employment, because half of the men are going to lose their jobs. It's a threat to the men in terms of safety, because this will be the first time that miners here have been asked to work alone. They had always worked with at least one partner.
In the rapidly industrializing world of the early 1900s, dangerous and dehumanizing workplace conditions propelled a wave of revolutionary unrest.
We propose to secure the liberty of the men and women who toil in industry, to save the oppressed from the oppressor.
In the United States, workers began forming labor unions, taking to the streets, confronting their employers.
I think this period is the most radical moment in the history of American labor. It's with the rise of the large corporation or the large enterprise where you have a permanent class of people who will never be anything but wage workers, and another group who are owners and a completely different economic and political power level, that you see, I think, a deep divide in America. And that, I think, is really central to the anger and the rage that you see in so many conflicts.
That anger not only fueled labor organizing efforts around the country, it occasionally led to open conflict. The most militant of the emerging unions was the Western Federation of Miners, the WFM. Formed in 1893, its constitution held that the working class, and it alone, can and must achieve its own emancipation. The founders of the Western Federation of Miners wore suits when they made this declaration, but their ideology was forged when they worked the mines of Colorado, Utah, and Montana. When mine owners refused to negotiate, the Union resorted to tactics more suitable for warfare in places like Cripple Creek, Colorado, and Coeur d'Alene, Idaho.
I think as close to open class warfare as the United States has ever had were in these series of very dramatic, often very violent strikes in the very end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century out in the West in the metal mining industry. And that's where the Western Federation of Miners comes from. They had a kind of ethos of autonomy and deeply resented the efforts by these big corporations to control the industry, to control their own lives.
Having survived epic battles out west, WFM organizers brought their banner to the copper country in 1912 and began organizing the mine workers. The effort was spearheaded by WFM President Charles Moyer.
Charles Moyer came to unionism with a very checkered background. He spent time as a cowboy. He was convicted of bank robbery, but he also worked in the mines. And he was very radicalized, and he used the language of radicalism to describe what he wanted the workers to do. There's a famous Western Federation of Miners poster called "Is Colorado in America?" where he says, "We are going to break the chains that are binding the working class." And Charles Moyer's signature is at the bottom of the poster. His rhetoric was socialist, but his methods were pragmatic. When Moyer came to the copper country, he was faced with a large group of union workers who spoke other languages. Even mine management didn't think Moyer could possibly get these people to organize and work together in unison. And he did. And he did this by bringing in other organizers who spoke other languages. Their literature, their handbills, their flyers, their newspapers were also written in the languages of these other workers, so they all could get together and act as one.
The newer immigrants to the copper country were especially receptive to the WFM's message.
The communist revolution was on the horizon, and ideas of socialism and communism were coming to this country. So when the organizers of American unions came here, it was fertile ground to be talking to the immigrants.
The number of card-carrying WFM members in the copper country increased dramatically throughout the first half of 1913. Summer came to the Upper Peninsula. By July 1913, 9,000 men, a majority of the mine workers here, had joined the union and demanded action.
This strike was really launched during the summer, not by the national organization of the Western Federation of Miners, headquartered out in Colorado. It was launched by the locals here in the copper country. They are the ones who pressed for the strike when they did. They're the ones who felt that the drills, the one-man drills, are soon going to be forced into place. They're the ones who know that if you're going to run a strike here, you've got to do it during the summer. You don't want to strike during the winter. So they are the ones who drew a line in the sand and said it to the mining companies. If you don't meet with us, we're going to go out on strike.
On July 14th, 1913, a letter arrived at the Calumet and Hecla Administrative Office building. It landed on the desk of General Manager James McNaughton. It came from the WFM and demanded that management negotiate the members' wages, hours, and working conditions. And there was this warning. Failure to answer will be taken as proof that you are not willing to have the matters settled peacefully. McNaughton did not answer. Neither did mine managers throughout the region who'd received identical letters. On Wednesday, July 23, 1913, 14,000 men in 3 counties laid down their tools.
The strike began in late July in 1913, and by the next day, all the mines are closed. And this was a tremendous accomplishment to get the mines shut down. Then the trick was to keep them shut down. And this is where the union part of the union comes into play. You need everyone pulling together to make this happen. So the strikers then had rallies, they went on parades, and they've tried physically to discourage anyone from going to work. Women played an important role in the strike, in the active, in the streets kind of battles. And that is, I think, partly they would be kind of put out in front because the anti-unionists would be less likely to beat up women. There's a famous ringleader here known as Big Annie, or Annie Clements, who was a Croatian woman who would be at the forefront of a lot of these parades.
When local lawmen advanced on a strike march that Annie Clements led through Calumet, she stood her ground. And when they wrenched the flag from her hands, she declared, "Kill me, but I won't move. If this flag won't protect me, I'll die with it."
Initially, the anti-unionists were appalled by the role that women were playing, that they would be shouting, these women would be out there shouting rude things that women shouldn't be saying, and they would dip their brooms in the outhouse and smear the strike breakers with it and that kind of stuff. So they were really in the streets kind of fighters.
The strikers paraded and blocked the entrances to the mines, and they managed to get the mines shut down on day 1. The mines went to zero production, and mine management was very frightened of this. The workers were extremely happy that they had accomplished this, but the question was, how long could they keep the mines shut down?
With their surface operations idled and machinery rusting underground, mine managers also took their position public. Calumet and Hecla's general manager, James McNaughton, struck a defiant tone in national newspapers. Grass will grow in the streets before CNH recognizes the union. The union must be killed at all cost.
Many industrialists and other members of the financial elite did absolutely despise labor. First of all, they saw it as a threat to their own wealth and power, but they were often contemptuous of workers. They thought that these unions and these radicals were trying to steal from them by people who were less able or less hardworking than they were. There, of course, was often a kind of racialist thinking behind this, a kind of notion of hierarchies of different ethnic groups. I think these all combined to a kind of a fear that fed to this fierce anti-unionism.
The union may have brought the mines to a standstill, but the strike didn't present an immediate threat to company finances.
Western Federation of Miners and its entire coffers had something like $23,000 when they started this strike. They're going against mining companies that had been here from the 1840s or the 1860s. Calumet and Hecla alone had $1 million worth of cash on hand. They had over $1 million of copper ready to be sold. The mines here were rich. They weren't going to let anything happen that was going to further erode their control.
To reassert their control, the mining companies brought in replacement workers. A multitude arrived here at the Calumet Depot, according to Steve Lato.
The replacement workers would have come through this depot. There were employment agencies in New York and Chicago, are the most famous locations for them, who specialized in going down to the docks or going to wherever the most recent immigrants are coming in and walking up and saying, hey, would you like a job? They would pay transportation costs for the workers to come to this area. They'd actually buy them the train ticket. But they'd make them sign a contract that said, by the way, you're going to pay us back out of your wages. So many of the replacement workers who showed up in this area showed up and they were already in debt to the employment agency that brought them here.
Some 3,000 replacement workers came to the copper country. They settled into bunkhouses on mine company property and were promptly put to work underground. The strikers responded with more heated demonstrations and violence.
The strikers had rallies, they went on parades, and they tried physically to discourage anyone from going to work. And this would be violence, essentially, beating up workers, throwing rocks, demonstrating in their way, whatever they could to keep people from going to work. The companies immediately went to the governor and said, help, we have a strike, send in the National Guard. Now, the National Guard plays an interesting role because they're supposed to be neutral, right? They're a law enforcement agency. But it was widely seen that the Guard was on the side of the companies. And in fact, they pitched their tents on company grounds. And then the companies assumed that the National Guard was going to defend the peace in the way that they wanted.
For good measure, the mining companies supplemented the National Guard with professional strikebreakers. Their job was to do what the National Guard would not.
The mines brought in professional strikebreakers, hundreds of them from New York and Chicago, hired thugs to protect the interest of the mines. Many of them were deputized by the sheriff, and the sheriff even deputized hundreds of loyal, non-striking workers. So you've got men roaming the streets of Calumet under the color of law, carrying badges and guns. A lot of violence broke out, but almost all of it was directed at the strikers. Despite that, hundreds of union members were arrested on trumped-up charges of things like intimidation or loitering. And while all this is going on, the corporations are even hiring spies to infiltrate the unions. So the union hall or any place the union members are meeting, there are spies in their presence reporting back to mine management on every move they're making.
While researching the 1913 strike, historian Gary Kanonen came across a cache of secret communications written to mine executives from labor spies.
The mining companies were one step ahead of what the union was doing. They had people down in the mines reporting on how many people were complaining about work that was going on, how many people were leaving the mines. A lot of this information that was coming in was then reported via coded messages from Calumet back to mining company management.
When properly deciphered, telegrams containing gibberish like "there is dog among exploration oblivious of unscrew" becomes "there is dissension among executive officers of the union." Autumn came, and the strikers' resolve was tested. The alliance of replacement workers, state militia, and strikebreakers ensured that the mines could resume operations, at least on a limited basis.
The striking members of the Western Federation of Miners could not manage to keep the mines shut down, and in fact, they played right into the hands of the mining companies. Mining companies were happy to inflict economic pain on the union and on its members, and they wanted those people to feel pain because they were going to beat them. They're going to beat them badly. They're going to beat them so that they didn't come back for another quarter century and try to unionize these mines again. And so they wanted the strike to be dragged out just enough to cause people to feel the pain and suffering of going hungry, not having cash flow, and living in uncomfortable conditions here where you got so much tension everywhere you looked in society.
As strike conditions worsened, strikers began deserting the Upper Peninsula in search of work downstate, where the economy was booming. Henry Ford had opened an automobile plant in Highland Park to meet surging demand for the Model T. At a time when miners made $3 a day, Ford paid his workers $5 in a workplace far safer than a copper mine.
Quite a number of strikers left the area with their families. Those who stayed behind hoped that the strike would end, but they had no idea when it was going to end. The copper country used to be peaceful. Now there's violence in the streets. The mine management used the violence as an excuse to put together an organization called the Citizens Alliance. The Citizens Alliance was a front group that the mines used to oppose the union, to battle the union.
8,000 people joined the Citizens Alliance. They signed pledges to end what they called the WFM's destructive socialism and disregard of law and order.
The Citizens Alliance would hold rallies funded by mine management. Mines would pay for the speakers, the entertainment, the alcohol. And after these rallies broke up, quite often they would go out and trash a union headquarters or trash something associated with the unions. They were not law and order. They were actually a destabilizing force. And that was one of the things that was leading up to the winter.
Winter arrived in the copper country. Calumet and Hecla's James McNaughton issued an ultimatum to strikers. Union President Charles Moyer urged them to reject it.
Tensions were running high. James McNaughton was about ready to tell the people that you either quit the strike right now or you've got no jobs to come back to when the strike is finally over. But the merchants and so forth at Calumet and in the copper country asked McNaughton not to issue that because it was the Christmas season. Let's get through Christmas. Let's try to enjoy a little bit of holiday here before we bring the hammer down on the strikers. And McNaughton agreed.
The 1913 holiday season found the copper country divided. In their manor homes, mine managers received bonuses for their opposition to the strike. The strikers subsisted on donated food and infrequent union benefits. Homes went unheated. Illness and malnutrition were common. There were fewer public displays of solidarity.
Many of the miners, their resolve had been broken. The strike was starting to peter out, and many people were leaving. For those for whom Christmas was an event, it certainly was a gloomy Christmas.
This union organizer, Annie Clement, decided to have a Christmas party for the children. And she went around and got donations from the merchants and was hoping to be able to, give an orange or something to each child.
The Women's Auxiliary of the WFM scheduled the party for Christmas Eve at the Italian Mutual Benefit Society in downtown Calumet. The building was better known as the Italian Hall.
They gathered on the second floor of Italian Hall, which was this large meeting space with a stage at one end and even had a balcony along part of it. So a big high-ceilinged room, but it was on the second floor.
Eventually, there were 600 or 700 people in the Italian Hall. As the festivities proceeded, they sang hymns in different languages, the children met Santa Claus, they got their presents. At the height of the festivities, a man came into the building from the outside, climbed the steep flight of stairs, entered the doors into the Italian Hall, and yelled out twice in English, "Fire."
There was a stampede to the stairwell. People raced to get out of the building. Some managed to get to the bottom of the stairs, pushed the doors open, and got out. But then somebody tripped and fell. And people coming in behind them tripped and fell on top of them. And more people came in on top, and more people came in on top.
My great-grandfather scooped up my grandmother, and my two great aunts held onto his coattails as they headed towards the stairwell. There was such a rush behind them that the two older sisters were thrown down the hallway, and piles of bodies landed on top of them.
Davy Holmbow's grandmother and great aunts were among the victims brought here to the Calumet Theater, 1 block away.
My great-aunt Lydia, age 10, died. My great-grandmother was so distraught that she could not attend the funeral of Lydia and sat by a window in a rocking chair all winter long watching the snow fall.
No one died of anything connected to a fire. They died of asphyxiation. They were suffocated there on the stairs. The mass of humanity was so thick that it was difficult to pull these people out in time to save them. Some were pulled out and saved. Many were pulled out and already dead.
The tragedy made headlines across the country. It would take the coroner several days to determine the toll. 73 dead, 60 of them children.
The immediate consequence of the Italian Hall tragedy was shock. The Italian Hall disaster caused some people who are rabidly antagonistic towards the Western Federation of Miners to at least stop and think about the tragedy as being a kind of sorrowful thing that those people were experiencing. So some sympathy went out to the strikers that had not been there at all before then.
Funeral arrangements were hastily made. Coffins were shipped to Calumet from across the state.
The company response was twofold. Officially, there was none. The company was no more likely to negotiate. They didn't come running out and say, oh, how can we help or whatever. But behind the scenes, the company management wanted to supply $5,000 to the relief fund. So they were as appalled by this loss of life as anyone.
Many people were hoping that this would be a healing moment. Telegrams poured into the community offering help. People started sending in money and offering financial assistance. The Citizens Alliance even raised money to give to the victims' families. And as they went door to door trying to give the money away, it was being rejected. The union members would not take the charity. And Charles Moyer famously said, "The union will bury its own dead."
The funeral service for the Italian Hall victims was held on December 28, 1913. Hundreds of mourners joined the procession from downtown Calumet to the cemetery. Striking miners skilled at boring through rock had dug trenches in the frozen ground. Eulogies were delivered in English, German, and Croatian by the clergy. Union leaders issued a final demand. It is not charity that we want, it's justice.
After the Italian Hall, Charles Moyer went to his hotel room and started sending out telegrams to anybody who might listen, the president, the governor. One telegram he sent said, "This terrible affair demands immediate investigation by state authorities." He didn't point any fingers and didn't place any blame. He simply wanted an investigation. But word got out that Moyer was sending out these telegrams, and it scared people. Shortly after Moyer went to his hotel room, there's a knock on his door. And in walks the sheriff and a group of local dignitaries. And they ask him to stop sending out the telegrams, and they also ask him to issue a statement exonerating the Citizens Alliance of any liability for the Italian Hall disaster. And he says, "I can't do that because I don't know what happened myself." And at that point, the sheriff says, "Well, in that case, I can't protect you anymore." And he and the group of men he's with leave. And a moment later, there's a second knock at the door. And in barges a group of men openly wearing Citizens Alliance pins. They start beating him, and one of them hits him on the head with a gun, and the gun discharges, and it lodges a bullet in his back.
The mob dragged Moyer to the Houghton-Hancock Bridge. At the center point, the mob threw him against the railing and threatened to throw him into the river. He resisted, and they dragged him to the Houghton Depot and threw him on a train. When the train arrived in Chicago, Moyer was rushed to a hospital for emergency surgery. The following day, he summoned his Union officers to the hospital room and telegrammed federal officials. His message? The situation in the copper country is out of control. In the new year of 1914, the U.S. Congress responded to the turmoil in the copper country by dispatching a delegation to mediate a settlement. 5 congressmen arrived in the dead of winter to find the strikers persevering and the mine managers unyielding.
One of the things that the United States Congress did in Michigan was to step in and try to settle these disputes by forcing the two sides to sit at a table together and work out a mutually acceptable agreement. These issues, which might have been considered private issues, issues between particular employers and particular employees, became public issues. And this created both pressure on companies to improve the lot of these workers, to address some of these horrible circumstances, but also on the government.
The mine managers appeared before the congressmen. Calumet and Hecla General Manager James McNaughton testified at length, but he was steadfast in his refusal to negotiate with the union.
They asked McNaughton, "Why won't you mediate the strike? Why won't you negotiate the strike?" And he reaches in his pocket, apparently, and he brandishes his billfold at the people from Congress who are asking him the question. He says, "This is my billfold. I don't have to negotiate that with anybody. It'd be silly for me to do so." And that's exactly the kind of attitude that they had.
For the striking miners, the spring of 1914 was not a new beginning, but rather an end. Congress ended its investigation into allegations of mining company wrongdoing. The coroner and local law officials abandoned their Italian Hall inquiries. The Union Strike Fund was depleted. On April 10, 1914, the WFM Executive Board pondered its options. Union President Charles Moyer proposed that after fighting one of the most determined battles, striking miners should return to their employment under such conditions as they're able to secure. The board unanimously approved his proposal. With that, the strikers returned to the mines. Only half were given back their jobs, on condition that they abandon the Union, which they did. Evidence of the Union's defeat is now held in a National Park Service vault in Calumet. It's a ledger containing the names of 8,000 miners who'd gotten back their jobs in the Copper Country mines. According to archivist Jeremiah Mason, the ledger was presented to Calumet and Hecla General Manager James McNaughton, along with a special gift.
The employees contributed 5 cents toward the purchase of a watch for General Manager James McNaughton, who had broken the strike, and there was a letter with all of their signatures in a bound ledger thanking him for keeping the WFM from taking over the Copper Country. A lot of these people who signed the ledger, of course, had been involved in the strike and had to turn in their union cards. And then, no matter what their personal feelings were, if they wanted to continue working for the company, this was the perspective that had to adopt.
The inscription reads, "Due to your attitude of no compromise, the Copper Country is not afflicted with the presence of the Western Federation of Miners."
Take a trip with me in 1913 to Calumet, Michigan in the Copper Country. I'll take you to a place called Italian Hall, where the miners are having their big Christmas ball.
In 1941, Woody Guthrie wrote a song called 1913 Massacre after reading about the Italian Hall disaster. Taken as history, the song is a flawed work. Guthrie made no attempt to conceal his pro-labor bias and got several facts wrong. But taken as art, the song is transformative.
Oh, you ask about work and you ask about pay. They'll tell you they make less than $1 a day. Working the copper claims, risking their lives. So it's fun to spend Christmas with children and wives. A little girl sits by the Christmas tree lights to play the piano, so you gotta keep quiet. To hear all this fun, you would not realize that the copper boss stuck men are milling outside. How the copper boss stuck their heads in the door. And one of them yelled and he screamed, "There's a fire." A lady, she hollered, "There's no such a thing. Keep on with your party, there's no such a thing." A few people rushed and it was only a few. It's just the thugs and the scabs fooling you. A man grabbed his daughter and carried her down, but the thugs held the door and he could not get out. And then others followed, 100 more. But most of everybody remained on the floor. The gun thugs, they laughed at their murderous joke, while the children were smothered on the stairs by the door. Such a terrible sight I never did see. We carried our children back up to their tree. The scabs outside still laughed at their spree, and the children that died were 73.
The Guthrie Ballad became a standard in the folk canon and elevated a tragedy into folklore. It gave millions a sense of the labor struggles of a turbulent era. But the outcome of the Copper Country Strike of 1913 and the labor unrest that informed it wasn't entirely negative.
Just after the end of this strike, the United States Congress passes a bill that says the federal government is going to step in and try to settle these disputes by forcing the two sides to sit at the table together and work out a mutually acceptable agreement. That's a huge step forward. There's a child labor law that forbids the interstate commerce in goods made by children. Then, in 1916, the federal government regulates the hours of work on railroads. It basically puts the 8-hour day on the railroads. So these are all fundamental shifts in the relationship of government to labor relations. They are actually impinging on the autonomy of employers to do whatever they want. And they come out of defeats as much as victories by labor.
But while there was broad social progress in the U.S. following the 1913 strike, the copper country entered a slow economic decline. The last mining company closed down in the 1960s. The jobs left, and the people left with them.
The strike is often blamed for destroying the industry up here, and that's not true at all. In fact, several things drove the industry downward, and one was the price of copper, and the other is that it just cost more at that time to mine the copper here than in new places opening up in the American Southwest. So essentially, it's economics that destroyed the industry here.
A lot of people came to take that strike as an example of a bunch of outside agitators who came in, stirred things up, ruined things for everybody for a while, and then left. Particularly given the Italian Hall disaster, that sentiment is still out there amongst some people today who think that if this area had just been left to itself, and if the Western Federation of Miners hadn't shown up, that it would have been a happy place for a longer period of time than it was.
A perceived symbol of that unhappiness, the Italian Hall, was demolished in October 1984.
There were a couple reasons given as to why they tore the Italian Hall down. Some people thought it was unsafe. There were cracks that you could see from the outside forming in the building. However, a lot of people think they just tore it down because there's an ugly reminder of something bad that happened here.
The site where the Italian Hall once stood is now a memorial park. Its centerpiece, the hall's arched doorway. It's all that remains.
The Italian Hall disaster is one of the most important labor events in American labor history. I think it's extremely important to remember because many of these same issues that were happening then are happening now. You can't forget things like that. If we forget them, we repeat them. I believe this is sacred ground because 73 people died here in the name of labor.
The piano played a slow funeral tune, and the town was lit up by a cold Christmas moon. The parents, they cried, and the miners, they moaned. I'll see what your greed for money has done.
Sherlock Holmes was the first CSI. From blood to ballistics to poison, he was 120 years ahead of his time. But how did a fictional detective transform the world of forensic science? And how is he still helping to solve gruesome crimes over a century later?
Red Metal, The Copper Country Strike of 1913, is available on DVD. To order, visit shoppbs.org or call 1-800-PLAY-PBS. This program is made possible in part by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Be more PBS.
I live in a tiny village in New Hampshire, and across the river in Putney, Vermont, is the Greenwood School, a school for 50 boys with learning disabilities. Every November, the school has this tradition of charging the boys with memorizing the Gettysburg Address, and then around Lincoln's birthday, doing a public recital of that address.
407 years ago.
407 years ago.
And we watch them memorize it. We learn the backstories for 3 months. And I think there's something about these kids that is so moving and so inspirational that they do something that's really unbelievably tough, which is memorize some of the best words ever spoken. And there's no reason why, as they say, if we can do it, you can do it.
To learn more or to contribute your own reading of the Gettysburg Address, visit pbs.org. Be more PBS.
Celebrate the season with the Holiday Pops. Experience joyous holiday music performed by the Flint Symphony Orchestra. Saturday, December 21st at 7 and Sunday the 22nd at 3 p.m. at the Whiting. For tickets, 888-8-CENTER.
Choice Hotels of Michigan proudly supports CMU Public Broadcasting. Whatever your interest, Choice Hotels offers over 70 Michigan hotel locations for weekend getaways, family vacations, business trips, or group stays. Choice Hotels. We'll see you there.
Support provided by HS&C Wealth Management, a financial advisory practice of Ameriprise Financial Services Incorporated. Be a part of CMU Public Television. Your business can support our programming.
Thanks for watching CMU Public Television. If you'd like to make a special year-end contribution to support future programs, please go online at wcmu.org or mail your check to this address. Your support is very important to us. Thank you.
When you think of all the ways that we use water, obviously to cook, to bathe, to recreate in, but the most intimate use we have of water is we drink it, we consume it. Is it safe? Is it clean? Is it free of chemicals that can ultimately harm us?
Thursday at 7:30 p.m.
We're from Mexico. We carry that in our bright Christmas ornaments.
What I'm doing has been going on a long, long time.
I started making menorahs. It was like, wow.
Celebrate the holidays on the next Craft in America.
Friday night at 9 on CMU Public TV.
Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood made all children feel valued.
I like you just the way you are.
PBS is committed to ensuring his legacy lives on with programs that open a world of possibility. Give to your PBS station and support a neighborhood where every child belongs.
Support comes from Lansing Symphony Orchestra, presenting its annual Holiday Pops concert on Sunday, December 22nd at 3 p.m. Along with guest artists, the symphony will perform a variety of holiday tunes at Wharton Center. Information at lansingSymphony.org.
Support from Suzanne Johnson Sculpture and Jewelry Design in Grand Blanc, creating one-of-a-kind engagement rings with designs inspired by her European classical training as a sculptor. Specializing in colored gemstones, Canadian diamonds, and redesigning your existing diamonds into a new contemporary setting. Suzanne creates custom bronze sculptures for both public and private commissions.